The initial rays of morning streamed through the canopy, casting the woods in a soft, golden hue. The air, crisp and moist, was filled with the subtle aroma of pine needles and damp soil. Officer Emily Carter fastened her badge onto her uniform before setting out on the narrow trail, the gravel crunching softly under her boots. These early patrols were her sanctuary, a period when the town remained asleep and the world seemed pristine. She was intimately familiar with these woods. The old logging road skirted the edge of town, a route where events were rare. There were no calls for assistance, no urgent situations. Only her, the surrounding trees, and the occasional deer moving through the fog. Emily took a deep breath, allowing the serenity to wash over her. It was another standard shift, she reasoned, yet an unusual heaviness lingered in the morning atmosphere. A sensation crawled up her spine, the kind that awakened her intuition. She slowed her pace, her eyes sweeping over the silent trees. Nothing. Dismissing the feeling, she adjusted her radio and proceeded along the path. It was then that she perceived it, a noise so slight it might have been her imagination. A gentle rustling sound behind her, like small paws moving through fallen leaves. Emily froze, rotating slowly. From the shadows emerged a little German shepherd puppy, scarcely larger than a loaf of bread. His ears seemed too big for his head, and his wide, terrified eyes met hers. His small tail quivered, seemingly torn between apprehension and anticipation. Emily's breathing caught in her throat. She knelt deliberately, her knees touching the damp ground as she brought herself down to the puppy's eye level. "Hello there, little one," she murmured, her voice just above a whisper. The puppy did not flee. He remained motionless in the middle of the trail, his small chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Emily carefully reached out her hand, palm up and unwavering, letting it rest just above the forest floor. She made sure her actions were gentle, almost reverential, granting the small creature all the space it required. The puppy's oversized head cocked to one side, an ear twitching with nervousness while the other remained erect like a flag. His dark eyes shifted from her hand to her face and back, filled with a wide, questioning look. For a moment, his tiny paws stayed fixed to the spot, claws digging into the soil as if seeking stability from his fear. Then, with a shaky inhale, he shifted his body forward. A small paw rose, hung in the air, and then came down on the gravel with a soft crunch. He stopped, assessing the situation, assessing her. A second step came, even more slowly than the last. His entire frame was taut like a compressed spring, poised to bolt at the slightest misstep. Emily held her breath. She allowed the forest to maintain its silence as the distance between them closed. Now just a few inches from her, the puppy halted. His nose quivered, taking in the new scent of leather, soap, and human warmth. For a brief instant, his ears relaxed, and his body inclined ever so slightly toward her hand before he stopped, muscles tensing once more, as if an inner voice was cautioning him. "Be careful. Not yet. You aren't lost, are you?" Emily whispered, her eyes meeting his wide, glistening ones. There was something in them, something raw and desperate that transcended simple hunger or solitude. Emily remained kneeling for another moment, her hand still suspended near the puppy. His small body shook, and while his paws seemed eager to move forward, he never covered the final inches separating them. She could see it in his gaze, that spark of hope intertwined with fear, as if he stood at the brink of a decision much larger than his small size could bear. At last, Emily drew back her hand and rose to her feet, giving him room. The motion caused the puppy to recoil slightly, yet he did not flee. Instead, he shuffled one tentative step nearer, his nose twitching as if committing her scent to memory. Emily took a deliberate step backward down the trail. His response was immediate. Tiny claws made a soft scraping sound on the gravel as he moved in sync with her, his small body maintaining the same delicate distance as before. When she halted, he halted. When she moved to the side, he mirrored her motion, his gaze never leaving hers. "This is not a coincidence," Emily muttered to herself. Her intuition, the very same that had protected her in numerous unpredictable scenarios, whispered the reality of the situation. This puppy wasn't lost. He was making a choice. Emily chose to test her theory. She crouched down low once more, her voice little more than a whisper on the cool morning air. "What is happening, little one?" The question seemed to create ripples in the quiet woods. The puppy's ears stood straight up, twitching as though every syllable held significance. His trembling subsided, and for the first time, his wide eyes softened, not with fear, but with a look of recognition. A quiet whimper escaped him. It was not the uncertain sound of a lost creature. It was delicate, raw, as if something within him had finally broken through. That sound conveyed importance, urgency, and hope. Then, with a shaky breath that seemed almost like an act of courage, he turned on his small paws and moved off the relative safety of the path. His body still trembled, every muscle conveying his uncertainty. Yet there was a new quality to his movement, a hint of trust. He forced his way through the initial layer of undergrowth, stopping just long enough to look back over his shoulder, his eyes locking with hers in a silent plea. "Please follow me." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded harder than it had during any emergency call she had ever taken. The puppy paused a few feet into the brush and turned completely to face her. For one suspended second, the surrounding forest seemed to vanish. Emily took a calming breath, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of her badge as if to steady herself. The small German shepherd stood waiting, partially concealed by the foliage, his little body shaking, yet his stare was resolute and unwavering. "All right," she murmured, her voice quiet but firm. "I am following you." Leaving the worn path felt like crossing an unseen boundary. The forest ground shifted under her boots, the familiar sound of gravel replaced by soft earth. Branches scraped against her uniform as she navigated the first dense layer of green. The atmosphere here felt heavier, laden with the fragrance of moss and pine. The puppy hurried a few feet in front, his movements swift but controlled. Every few paces, he would pause and glance back to confirm she was still behind him. Emily registered the purpose in his direction. This was not a random trek. He knew his destination precisely. As they ventured deeper, the sounds of the awakening woods diminished to a muted quiet, interrupted only by the gentle rustling of leaves under their feet. Emily's pulse seemed to synchronize with the quiet determination of the puppy's steps. A root caught her boot, causing her to steady herself on a low-hanging branch. She regulated her breathing, the significance of the moment intensifying with each step. The puppy stopped just long enough to look back, his dark eyes meeting hers. Emily swallowed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Whatever this is, we are going to find it." The puppy's ears flickered at her words, but he did not slow down. A minute later, he came to an abrupt stop next to a massive fallen tree. His small frame grew rigid, and his tail dropped low. He then let out a single bark, not a playful or inquisitive one, but sharp and authoritative. Emily's chest constricted. Whatever he had led her here to discover was just on the other side of that log. Emily's boots sank into the soft ground as she moved around the fallen tree. The morning sun barely penetrated this section of the woods, leaving the area covered in soft shadows. At first, she perceived nothing but a jumble of branches and wet leaves. Then, her gaze settled on a form lying in the depression between the tree's roots. Her breath caught. It was another German shepherd, an adult. Her body was curled into itself as though attempting to merge with the earth. Her coat, once thick and majestic, was matted with dried blood and smeared with dirt. One of her back legs was bent at a grotesque angle, and faint gashes marked her flanks like a chronicle of suffering. Emily fell to her knees before she was even aware of her own movement. The small puppy rushed ahead with a quiet, desperate whine, pressing his little body against the larger dog's neck. He nudged her softly again and again, as if trying to compel her back to life. Emily's hand remained suspended in the air for a moment, her breathing trapped in her chest. The world contracted to the slight movement of a broken body and a puppy that would not give up. Her professional training cut through the surge of emotion as she gently placed 2 fingers on the dog's chest, silently pleading for a sign of life. A brief pause, followed by a faint, weak pulse. It was feeble, but it was present. "Oh, my dear," Emily whispered, her voice cracking in the silent forest. The puppy emitted a sound so small and raw it felt more piercing than any cry she had ever heard. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't an expression of fear. It was relief. He looked up at Emily, his tiny face streaked with grime. In that instant, she realized he had not been lost. He had not been aimlessly wandering. This determined little creature had been clinging to hope, undertaking a mission his small legs could hardly sustain. He had not been seeking assistance for himself. He had been attempting to rescue his mother. Emily unhooked her radio, her hands trembling despite her years of experience. Her voice broke as she keyed the transmitter. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I have 2 canines in the north sector by mile marker 7. 1 adult female in critical condition, 1 juvenile, uninjured but traumatized. I'm requesting an immediate veterinary response and assistance for extraction." A crackle of static followed for a moment. Then, a composed voice acknowledged that help was en route. Emily let out a shaky breath and placed the radio on the ground. She looked back at the pair, her knees sinking into the moist earth. The older dog remained still, aside from the faint rise and fall of her chest. The puppy did not leave her, his small body pressed close as if he could keep her alive through his presence alone. "Hey, little guy," Emily whispered, reaching out with a slow hand. She gently placed it along his back. The puppy tensed for a second, then leaned into her touch, his shaking diminishing slightly. How long had he been here? How many nights had he circled this very spot, hoping for someone, anyone, to notice? The question made her throat feel tight. "You did a good job," she murmured, her voice soft yet firm. The puppy blinked up at her with eyes that seemed far too wise for his age. For the first time, his body appeared to slump against her leg, as though the burden of his quest had finally been lifted. His breathing steadied, small, warm exhales against her uniform. Emily observed the battered mother and her courageous little protector. This was not merely about survival. This was love in its most unadulterated and desperate manifestation. The faint wail of a siren filtered through the trees minutes later, muffled and distant beneath the canopy. Emily rose just in time to direct the team to her position. 2 animal rescue officers and a mobile veterinary unit made their way over the rough terrain, their expressions becoming serious as they took in the scene. "She is still alive," Emily stated quickly, stepping aside but keeping one hand on the puppy to calm him. "She's in critical shape, but there is a heartbeat." The veterinarian knelt beside the injured German shepherd, her actions deliberate but swift. "We need to stabilize her here before we move her. Keep the pup nearby. He is bonded to her." As they worked, the small dog's world seemed to come apart. The instant they moved his mother onto the stretcher, he let out a sharp, frightened yelp and his little body lunged forward. Emily intercepted him mid-leap, scooping him up into her arms. He struggled for a moment, then went still as she held him securely against her chest. "She is going to be all right," Emily whispered, her voice low and confident, though a part of her felt uncertain. "You've done your job. Now let them do theirs." The puppy's frantic shaking lessened slightly, and he tucked his head under her chin as if to hold on to her promise. By the time they arrived at the mobile unit, the adult dog had received fluids and pain relief. Her breathing became more regular, although it remained shallow. Later that afternoon at the clinic, the staff worked with efficiency. There were x-rays, emergency surgery, and quiet updates. Emily remained in a corner with the puppy curled on her lap, his gaze fixed on the doors behind which his mother lay. They decided to name her Luna, and the brave little shadow who had saved her, they called him Rex. Days stretched into weeks within the quiet confines of the veterinary clinic. Emily came to visit after each of her shifts, still dressed in her uniform, carrying the lingering scent of pine from her patrols. Every time the door opened with a creak, Rex would dash from his spot, his tail a frantic blur of recognition. Luna, while still frail, always seemed to sense Emily's presence. Her head would raise slightly, her weary eyes softening at the sight of the woman who had brought them out of the woods. Emily would spend hours sitting on the cool tile floor, one hand resting on Luna's flank while Rex nestled in her lap. The connection between the mother and her pup was unbreakable. Rex never strayed from her side, sleeping beside her and nudging her gently anytime her breathing seemed labored. One quiet afternoon, Emily observed as Rex crept close to his mother and pressed his small nose against hers. He held the position for a moment, then turned his gaze to Emily, his eyes communicating what words could not. "She is getting better." Something inside her gave way. Emily had rescued animals in the past, responded to innumerable calls, but this felt different. She was not merely observing survival. She was witnessing a family clawing its way back to health, bound by a love that was stronger than any fear. Driving back to her vacant cabin that night, Emily's grip on the steering wheel was tighter than normal. The quiet within the vehicle felt more profound than the silence of the forest had been that day. By the time she turned into her driveway, the choice had already solidified in her mind. She did not want to part with them. No, it's more than that. She couldn't, she whispered aloud. The words were both a vow and an epiphany. They belong here with me. The adoption forms were signed without much fanfare, but they held the significance of a life-altering event. Within a few days, Emily left the clinic with Luna and Rex beside her. Luna walked with caution, her injured leg wrapped and supported, while Rex pranced around her with the boundless energy unique to a puppy, never moving too far from his mother. Their new residence was a peaceful cabin on the outskirts of town, where the aroma of pine wafted through open windows and the sound of birdsong marked the start of each day. Rex investigated every nook, as if charting their new territory, chasing after falling leaves and barking at the first squirrel brave enough to venture into the yard. Luna, still walking with a slight limp, would find a spot for herself in the shade of a tree, her eyes continuously following her son's every action. Emily stood in the doorway on that first evening, observing them. The cabin had always been her place of solitude, a refuge after demanding shifts. Now it felt transformed, full of life. As she came inside, Rex bounded over to her, his tail wagging with such force that his entire body swayed. Luna came after him more slowly, resting her head on Emily's boot with a gentle sigh. The weight of that gesture, the trust, the affection, struck her more powerfully than she had anticipated. It is often said that animals find the people who need them. Emily had once thought so too, but as she looked at Luna and Rex, she understood the reality was more profound. Sometimes they do not simply find you. Sometimes they guide you to the love you never realized was absent from your life. That night, as the woods outside whispered on the wind, Emily sat on the floor with both dogs pressed close to her. And for the first time in a long while, she did not feel lonely.